So 3 months ago at this point, and even as recently as 3 weeks ago, I think we all expected, Sooner Nation, that we would be sitting here talking about a college football playoff appearance the day after championship weekend and the announcement of the playoff rankings. And so Oklahoma, of course, anticipating to be in that mix for the entire offseason and even as it struggled through the entire season. But things change quickly in college football. And here we are the day after the regular season is over. Baylor is the Big 12 champion. Oklahoma in search of a new head coach. And we believe we have one with, of course, Lincoln Riley out in Los Angeles. So welcome into the Voice of College Football, our Oklahoma live show, and a special edition here on Sunday afternoon. So welcome in, everyone. We appreciate you joining us. And, of course, the guy that makes this all happen, Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, with news about to be formalized, we believe, that is certainly out there and being reported by all the major services. Brent Venables, longtime defensive coordinator at Clemson, coming back to Oklahoma as head coach, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were actually here talking about this a week ago today. I think it was obviously a week ago today that that Riley had mentioned that he was, the announcement was that he was going to USC, and we kind of started talking about the guys. And for me, Venables was the guy that that I thought initially was going to be the guy that was named. And then it looks like it's heading in that direction. To your point, it hasn't been officially announced by the University of Oklahoma, but everything that I've heard and seen is it's pretty much a done deal. And I think Oklahoma is scheduled. Nothing's been announced, but from what I've been hearing is there will be a press conference at some point tomorrow to announce him.
Based on the conversations we've had, based on the feedback that we received from all the fine folks here in the live chat and others, is that it appears as though Brent Venables was at or near the top of most fans' list. He has gained that much credibility with his work at Clemson and obviously his work at Oklahoma to gain this kind of support for not being a coach that has a head coaching track record. To be this well accepted and people to be excited about him being the next head coach.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, there's a couple of things to that, Mark. I think, obviously based on his time at Oklahoma, Oklahoma hasn't played the level of defense that they really need to play since he's been gone. I think that's one part of it. But on the other side of it, it brings a little bit more familiarity to the program. The toughness, and I think we've talked a lot about this, where potentially Oklahoma, hasn't been, I don't think they've been as tough as a program as you would like to see. So I think, with anybody that watches Venables coach on the sidelines at Clemson knows that he brings all the passion, all the toughness, and so I think this was the guy that a lot of people thought initially would probably get the first call. Obviously, there was other people that were in the mix. There was this Dabo rumor that I still think that had a lot of legs. I still think there was some consideration made there. I'd heard from a reliable source that he was in fact contacted. There was mutual interest on both sides, and I think at the end of the day, he just decided that he wasn't ready, wasn't prepared to make a move like this. So I don't know that necessarily you would say that Venables was the second choice, but I think there was some serious discussion. I know Dan Lanning was part of the discussion as well. I think from what I've heard that he was there was a conversation that was had with him as recent as last night following the SEC championship game, and I think Aranda was another guy that was really part of it as well. But I think at the end of the day, the kind of the familiarity that that Oklahoma has with Venables and Joe Castiglione, the last two coaches, this is kind of his style, bringing in high level assistant coaches to come to Oklahoma. That was the case with Bob Stoops, and certainly that was the case with Lincoln Riley as well.
Folks, understand that we've got an Oklahoma show. Myself and Jason come your way every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, so please join us then. If you can't make it live, of course, that video posts every Wednesday as soon as the show's over. We appreciate you being here. Let anybody know that you know who loves Oklahoma football, that we are going to be here talking Brent Venables and the hiring here for the next several minutes. So it certainly seems like a case, Jason, and this may be why it took so long. And it wasn't one of these Billy Napier to Florida, like as soon as we heard about it, within a couple hours, boom, the next day, signed, sealed, delivered. He's the guy. That from the Oklahoma perspective, yeah, that there was possibly the conversations, or not possibly, it's pretty well confirmed, the Dabo Sweeney pursuit first and foremost. And then even beyond that, that while Brent Venables has made it pretty clear, I think, in many conversations over the years. So as a defensive coordinator, think about it this way, folks, that he interacts with the media far less than the head coach, but the offensive and defensive coordinators, depending on your school, but at a big time program like Clemson, usually meets with the media maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, something. So he has a number of interactions within the season and through the rest of the offseason with the media. So obviously, with him being one of the top defensive coordinators in the country at those two positions, and with all the coaching opportunities that have been out there throughout his tenure, he's brought up constantly and been asked that question. And he's never said, I will never be a head coach, I only want to be a coordinator. But based on his responses, it's been obvious that he needed the right fit, that he wasn't just desperate to be a head coach somewhere, that he was fine being the defensive coordinator at Clemson, and maybe that's the way his career would have concluded. So he was looking for the right fit. For anybody who turns down the head coaching job at Auburn, obviously there's probably only 10 or 15 jobs that you're going to take in the country. And for him, it might have only been a few, or maybe for him, maybe it's only one. Right. Maybe this was the job. We talked to Jason recently with our Clemson guy, Jason Priester, a number of times about this. And he said he wasn't guaranteeing that Brent Venables would not leave Clemson because he knew that he had ties to Oklahoma. Oklahoma, obviously an enticing offer from one of the very top programs in the country. But in that, he's a family man who actually moved, whether it was his parents or in-laws, all the way from Oklahoma to Clemson, bought them a home, set them up, had children in high school and college at Clemson University, in the local high schools, participating in sports there. And for anybody who has a family, has children, understands how difficult it is, a decision to uproot them, especially at that age. We're not talking about 3 and 4 year old kids. We're talking about kids that are heavily involved in their schools and friends and all of that. And so you almost get the feeling that this was the job and no other job would do.
It's a very interesting conversation, Mark. When this search happened, when the search started, I'd heard some noise about maybe potentially, hey, Venables is very, very happy with what he's doing at Clemson from a defensive coordinator perspective. I even heard the fact that he has no interest at all, even at this point, thinking, okay, I think he's 51. At this point in my life, will I have an opportunity for this? So I think to your point, Mark, I think he is very happy and satisfied. But I think some of the things that I heard early on was that this was not saying that this was the only job that he would be interested in. Certainly, if Dabo was to leave for somewhere else, I think that would have been a job that he would have been interested in. But if you turn down Auburn's a really, really good job, right? So you turn down a team in a program like that. It kind of makes you think: does he really want to be a head coach? And is the comfort level very low pressure? His defenses have been dynamic since he's been. I think the worst. I think the worst. I was reading something yesterday. I think the worst his defensive team has finished is 7th in the country in total defense since he's been there. So, but another thing that I heard kind of midweek, Mark, this week was that people that have talked to him has said this is his dream job. This is the job that really ultimately that he wanted and heard through some sources that I've had that he ultimately would without question take the job if Oklahoma offered him. So and I think you brought up a good point, Mark, that in some of these jobs it's been very quick to I think what Oklahoma did. I think from what I've heard, I think they settled on Brent. Not well, that's the wrong choice of words. They're not settling, but I think they made the decision that they wanted. This is the direction that they wanted to go. Probably midweek, from what I'm hearing, probably Wednesday, Thursday timeframe. This is where they wanted, but I think at the end of the day, they wanted to be very diligent in making sure, okay, this is the guy that we think that we want, but let's continue to go through this process and make sure that this is exactly who we want to have as our coach. So, and I think they got to that point with maybe some of the decisions or some of the discussions and some of the conversations that they had later in the week and then over the weekend as well.
13 seasons at Oklahoma as defensive coordinator or co-defensive coordinator. It's it's mighty impressive what he has done both there and, as you mentioned, at Clemson, statistically ranking in the top 5 consistently. At Clemson, you can say what you want about the schedule, but most of those teams then went on to playoff appearances and proved, probably his crowning achievement, I would think off the top of my head, at Clemson was facing an Alabama team that was consensus number 1 in the 2018 national championship game, Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback, all those consider 4 first-round wide receivers on that team, and Najee Harris in the backfield, a first-round running back in the backfield, and an NFL offensive line, 16 points. I think 16 points in the first quarter, and that was it.
Yep.
Done.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remember, of course, and you will as well, that the move that was made to bring him to Clemson was off the heels of, so this is Dabo Swinney, not being the Dabo Swinney that we know now, being this wide receiver coach who was elevated to the Clemson job, who was off to a nice start, had a 6-7 season, then he really got it going. They won the ACC championship. They went to take on Geno Smith at the Orange Bowl and got annihilated. They gave up 70 points in that game. And I remember watching that game, and it was one of those deals where it was about 45 in the second. Like, it could have been maybe 100. Like, it just settled on 70 because they didn't need any more. They were torn to shreds badly. And immediately they're going after Brent Venables. He comes in. Within a year or two, they've got a top flight defense. Just coaching in college football is enormous. That's all there is to it.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And a lot, it's kind of funny during these coaching searches. There's the rumor mill churns so hard, and I think we talked about this a little bit off air, talking about the Alabama Georgia game. Well, there was a and this happens from time to time. I think a lot of what happens with these online publications, there was a site, an Oklahoma site, that inadvertently released Dan Lanning had been named the head coach at Oklahoma, and it was so there was rumors about that, and then they retracted that pretty quickly. However, then on the top of that, there was maybe that's why Georgia's defense played so horribly. He was, had kind of one foot out the door and one foot in. So, but no, I think, the point that you make about, Venables going to Clemson, and we talked about this from the Oklahoma perspective. It was very interesting, when this happened, because, Mike Stoops had been brought back to Oklahoma by Bob after after Mike's stint in Arizona as a head coach, and Brent was the single defensive coordinator. Had been a co-defensive coordinator situation before, and he had, I know from a lot of people that he had a lot of heartburn deciding what to do. There was a situation where he kind of went and then decided to come back and then decided to go. And ultimately, I think it was probably the right decision. Certainly was the right decision for him based on, what he was able to do at Clemson. But yeah, no, you're right. Coaching, I mean, how critical is coaching? I mean, even at a positional coach, a coordinator, whatever it is, especially at the college game, it's incredibly important to being successful. And I think obviously the hope is Venables will be able to rekindle some of that. Obviously, bring some of that defensive, kind of knowledge and what he's been able to do at Clemson over, back to Oklahoma, and then certainly maybe improve to where they've been over the last, 3 or 4, even longer than that, even pre Riley. So I think it'll be interesting to see how quickly he, along with his staff, is able to kind of turn that around. And I think, the one thing that Bob had mentioned, we had talked about this, Mark, that it felt like, at least from my perspective, last Sunday, it almost felt like Oklahoma was going on probation. The fact that they're losing so many staff members, they're losing so many recruits, existing players within the team. But I think, Bob was very instrumental in how he addressed the media on talking about, this is still a 10-2 team. It's not like this is a 3-9 or a 4-8 team. There's not a whole lot. Maybe there's some cultural things that needs to be rebuilt, and some toughness areas and some strength areas that has struggled for a while. But I think that Oklahoma's in a good spot to certainly still be competitive. Maybe they probably don't come in with the trajectory that they had this year in 2022, but still they're in a really good spot. A lot of great players.
Yeah, it's not great to lose a top flight head coach. Of course, there is a loss there. Lincoln Riley goes to USC, but I think much of what is felt by the fan base isn't tangible. It's the feeling that we thought we were above that who would leave us for somewhere else, and it happened. That doesn't downgrade what Oklahoma is. That's just in that person's perspective, Lincoln Riley's, that he wanted more money and a different experience, and for whatever other reasons deemed the Pac-12 to be more viable, which makes sense than the SEC, to build a dynasty. Whatever his reasons, that shouldn't diminish or downgrade the Oklahoma program and the level of the coaching job just because one man determined that he would rather be somewhere else. But it's human nature to take that as a snub, as a hit. And so I think that the feelings that people were having this time last week were more connected to that than they were the reality of the situation. Yes, there was concern. Your coach just left. National Signing Day is coming up. Who's going to be the next coach? We thought we had one of the best. How do you replace him? And so those are valid concerns, but the program's in a good place. As you said, it's a 10-2 team here in 2021. It's a good team, a flawed team, but a good team.
Right.
It's a legitimate top 10 or 15 team in the nation, not as good as they were supposed to be. And now looking forward, it's going to be up to Brent Venables to maintain as much of this 2022 recruiting class as possible and move on from there. Another aspect of this, Jason, that we talked about a number of times is depending on which direction the program would go in terms of the strength of the new head coach, whether he was an offensive guy or a defensive guy, that it would be awfully important to balance that out with a strong coordinator on the other side. And of course, Jeff Lebby being the guy that ESPN and other sources are targeting as being Brent Venables' new offensive coordinator coming in from Ole Miss.
Yeah, no, I think that's the guy that I've heard, Mark, all along, that Oklahoma was either that Venables was targeting, or whoever it might be that was targeting, to your point, if it was going to be more of a defensive based hire. So I think he's still the guy, he's still the leader. I think Oklahoma has some inroads there, right? He went to school at Oklahoma. He was a grad assistant at Oklahoma. He is very, very close with he's very close with Joe John Finley, the existing tight ends coach at Oklahoma. So I think everything's a little bit of a natural fit. I think the one concern obviously is the baggage that he comes with, not necessarily him personally, but the fact that he was part of that Art Briles staff when when all that happened, and he's actually married to Art Briles' daughter. If you, I don't know if you knew that or not, but so I think that's the only pushback I think just that I've heard. So I think it'll be good for if he ends up being the hire. Mark, I would certainly expect Oklahoma's compliance department and Joe Castiglione have done their due diligence and have done their digging. Um, if he's the guy now, he's a hot commodity. He's probably might be the hottest commodity from an offensive coordinator, offensive coach perspective this offseason. He's being linked to Louisiana as a potential candidate for that job. He's been linked to some other big time SEC offensive coordinator jobs. LSU, I've kind of seen some news that Brian Kelly has a strong interest in bringing him over as well. So I don't know that it necessarily would get into a bidding war, but I do think that Oklahoma has a little bit of a leg up. I've heard that he probably would prefer to go to Oklahoma than to go to go anywhere and to be a coordinator. Um, so I think that's definitely part of the conversation, and that'll be interesting. Depends on how you view this, right? I mean, I don't know. Do you view a head coaching job wherever it is better than a coordinator job? I mean, it's just a debate that's been there. If he views the opportunity to go to a place like Louisiana and be the head coach first over being an offensive coordinator at a place like Oklahoma or Ole Miss or even LSU, whoever that is. So I think that's one area. I think the other area that's kind of gained a little bit of steam this late this morning, early this afternoon, is potentially Joe Brady, since he was let go from Carolina earlier this. I think it was I don't know if it was before the game or after the game, but at some point today, he was relieved of his offensive coordinator duties um, you know at Carolina. So that was a name previously that was linked to Oklahoma if Matt Rule was potentially coming to Oklahoma. So I think that's one area to think of. I don't know that Oklahoma has the pocketbooks to be able to do this. But there was some thought that potentially Brady could come over to Oklahoma in a very similar manner that where he was at LSU as the passing game coordinator. So don't know that Oklahoma would be able to do that, but I think those are the two names, the most prominent names that I've heard. Kendall Briles is another name that I've heard potentially would be a guy that's part of the mix. I think and Graham Harrell is another one. So that's really the extent of the names, but certainly Lebby is the odds-on favorite at this point.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here for a special edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live. Jason and I do this very thing every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, so please join us then. Understand that many of you have commitments, but please check in on the what you could call hashtag rewatch squad if you can't catch us live. But we also enjoy the live conversation with everyone, and so please join us on Wednesdays. Brent Venables reported to Oklahoma as the new head coach, and of course, most Oklahoma fans seem to be very happy about that. Jason, if you want to take this in any particular direction or go to questions. That is up to
Yeah,
you.
yeah. There's probably some thoughts about and this is a very interesting an interesting conversation about the defensive coordinator. So I think there's some thoughts initially that he would just come in and be be the defensive coordinator himself, and I don't think that's going to be the case. Just from from what he'll certainly have a hand in the game plan and the in the play calling situation, but I don't think he'll be the play caller. So I think there's two big names that I've heard consistently, today and then and last night. As well, and I think Brandon Hall is the first one. Was with Venables at OU when Venables was the defensive coordinator, was an assistant at Oklahoma. Currently the defensive coordinator at Troy, interim head coach at Troy. I think the one thing that a lot of Oklahoma fans probably would like is that um, he is the guy that actually I don't know, wouldn't say coordinated, but he was very integral in the special teams at Troy. Oklahoma's really kind of struggled in that area over the last few years. So I think that brings that brings a certain level of maybe comfortability to that area as well. So I think he's one that I've heard a lot about, just the familiarity that he has with Venables in the system in the system defensively as well. And I think another one is Todd Bates, existing defensive line coach at Clemson. Venables could bring him along. He's been with Clemson, I think, since 2013. Is now the recruiting coordinator. Just an excellent recruiter. Actually, was recruiter of the year in 2019. So I think bringing him over would also be a great move. I've kind of heard through that Dabo probably looks to go within, just in terms of replacing Venables. So I would think that possibly he might be a guy that is the next, could be the next defensive coordinator. I've heard Teddy Lehman has kind of made some coy comments about potentially Jim Leonard being a guy that's in the mix. Wouldn't on the cuff, it doesn't necessarily look like it would be necessarily a great fit. He's a great defensive coordinator, no doubt about it at all. But I just wonder, just from his background in Wisconsin, if that makes a ton of sense at Oklahoma. But it would absolutely be be a very, very solid hire. So those are the three names that I've probably heard more than anything. Strength and conditioning coach is something that's going to be, almost in my mind, Mark, maybe the third most important hire, based on kind of where Oklahoma was at. Jerry Schmidt was a guy that was with Stoops and had been with Oklahoma for years and years and years. A few years ago, he left and went to Texas A&M. So he's a guy that potentially could get a call. But I think this would be a really, really nice, almost a home run hire from this perspective. Tommy Moffatt is a guy who's been a long time strength and conditioning coach with LSU. He was let go earlier this week by Brian Kelly, just as part of the new staff. So I think he's a guy that absolutely would get a call as well. So those are some of the names that I'm hearing from kind of offensive, defensive coordinator, then obviously special teams. Special teams within strength and conditioning. And the one thing I wanted to kind of piggyback off just really, really quickly is, before we kind of take this however we want, is that we kind of mentioned, that Oklahoma's, they're not a 3-9 team, not a 4-8. There's plenty of talent. There's plenty of, I mean, they struggled a little bit this year, obviously, but when you think about it, the two teams that they lost to are in New Year's Six Bowl. So it's not like they lost to horrible teams. And if you're an Oklahoma fan, take solace in the fact that if anybody stayed up late to watch that USC game last night, their USC's in a much tougher spot than Oklahoma is, from a talent perspective. So, and I think Riley has the ability to turn around, but I think immediately it's going to be, it may be a little bit of a shock on just how either devoid of talent or just how much of a struggle they're in right now.
Yeah, that Cal team is nothing great, and they beat USC by 10 points to finish off USC season in 4-8. They were 4-8 in a weak conference, and they usually put together a pretty difficult schedule outside the conference. But other than that, it was the second worst defense in the Pac-12, and again, that's saying a lot. So yeah, Lincoln Riley's not necessarily going to hit the ground running. I'm sure there will be improvement, but they've got a long, long way to go. I see that Oklahoma's playing Oregon in the Alamo Bowl.
Yeah, it's very interesting with that matchup. So there was two matchups that Oklahoma was likely to get this year for this bowl game, and I think it was either going to be the Alamo Bowl or possibly the Cheez-It Bowl with Oklahoma facing Clemson. I don't know if either program really wanted any of that matchup based on the circumstances or anything. But yeah, so I think they just had I kind of read a tweet where they just had a introductory bowl press conference with Cristobal and Stoops, and what an odd situation that is. Stoops is obviously the interim coach and going to coach for one game, but Cristobal's been linked. I mean, earlier this morning to Miami, and Diaz is still the head coach. I think I saw where they were giving Cristobal until Monday to make a decision whether he wanted to come, and if he doesn't come, then they're going to extend Manny Diaz, which I mean that's just a nightmare. So, and you probably know the guys, the Clemson athletic director. I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Dan Radakovich,
yeah, and then he was kind of rumored to be possibly moving to Miami to be the AD. So it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I mean, Oregon has completely kind of flopped over this, which me and you kind of predicted, right? But I think they played pretty bad in both games against Utah. So especially if Cristobal ends up going to Miami, Oklahoma might be in a little bit better spot just in an interim phase than Oregon is coming into this game.
Yeah, as you outline it there, Mario Cristobal meeting with the media after a bowl selection in the midst of something that is the worst kept secret in the world about what Miami's doing right now between head coaches. And can you imagine if he turns down that job and the way they've treated Manny Diaz during this process? But what's he going to do? Has he put himself in a position to get a better job or any other job? Really, no. He's not done an outstanding job there. So, of course, he's going to accept the extension and continue on and hope to prove them wrong and hope to prove that he is the guy to build the program. But what a mess. Not handled well whatsoever.
Not at all. I mean, yeah. I mean, to your point, Mark. I mean, can you imagine being the head coach and say, "I'm still the guy," and you're publicly offering this job to someone else. I mean, if it was me, I don't know if he's in the position to do this, but just say, "Okay, I've had enough. I'm not gonna, not gonna deal with that." So, but yeah, it's weird. It's the time of the year where there's tons of movement going on. But yeah, you would expect a program like Miami to be able to handle that a little bit better than they have.
Between the playoff selections coming off what we witnessed last night and then all these coaching changes at high-profile jobs, we always have coaching changes, but because of the nature of coaching changes being typically with bad teams, they might be high-profile teams, but bad teams currently, we don't usually have this level of job openings. We have this many, but not LSU, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, USC, possibly Miami. Then it would be Oregon. We usually don't have that. It has completely overshadowed the diminishing status of these bowl games now, even though I'm going to be engaged, and I have yet to look at the matchups as they are being announced. But I'm always intrigued by the matchups. Always look forward to them. But the bowl season continues to be put into the background.
Yeah, no, it definitely has. I'm like you. I haven't necessarily kept up with all of the matchups. Obviously, it was a no brainer what 1 through 4 was going to be from a playoff perspective this morning. I mean, there was no real drama. I guess the only drama that we possibly could have seen was Alabama won or was Michigan won. I mean, you could probably make a solid case for either one of them. But yeah, I think that was the only one. I think that was the only one that was up for grabs. Certainly, we knew that no matter what Barta said, we knew you weren't going to get Alabama and Georgia in the first round. I mean, we knew that wasn't going to happen. So kind of put them where they needed to be put, and so I think, I mean, I'm with you. Not like extremely excited about the playoffs. I think Georgia and Michigan has an opportunity to be a decent game, but yeah, yeah. Other than that, like I just said, I just noticed Oklahoma assumed that they were going to face off against Oregon in the Alamo Bowl once Oklahoma State got picked for the Fiesta Bowl. So some interesting matchups. I mean, the bowl season is. I've always loved the bowl season, Mark, but it's turned into a situation that I just don't love. The fact that all these players are going to opt out. We're going to see it again this year. I mean, kids are going to opt out outside of the outside of the college football playoff. And me and you, we kind of root for chaos, especially because our vested interests weren't going to be making it to the playoffs. Mark, what I was really hoping was going to happen last night is I mean, not necessarily anything against Ohio State, but I was really hoping Notre Dame would find a way to get into the playoffs, and then you have a coach like Brian Kelly leaves a playoff spot, and I think how intriguing would it have been for your first head coaching experience whatsoever, not necessarily just with Notre Dame, but ever to to be in a college football playoff. I mean, from that storyline perspective, I was kind of interested to see if that would happen.
I wanted to see, once we got to the point of the Big Ten championship game, I wanted to see Iowa win and see some kind of wide open competition for that last spot. Iowa, Baylor, does Michigan still get it? Does Ohio State get into the mix? Do they have a right? Do they have a claim? Notre Dame, all of them have a different slice of an argument. But we didn't get it.
No, we didn't. But I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it was kind of a renaissance season. I know that's something that Josh Pate has really just kind of coined this year, and it's been we didn't quite get what we were looking for, but we do have two members in the college football playoff that's in there for the first time. So I guess beggars can't completely be choosers, right?
Yeah, compared to what we were projecting in the offseason and what we've received throughout the history of the college football playoff, having two outsiders per se make it is quite a bit of chaos, I guess, or unpredictability. Michigan was given in this FPI and probability of teams winning games and reaching playoffs or winning conferences. I continue to be confounded by it. So Michigan, I heard today, was a 0.2% chance of either winning the Big Ten or reaching the playoff, which would be a similar statistic. So regardless of which it was, again, I was not picking Michigan to win the Big Ten championship. I understand that the odds were against them, but 0.2%, I just don't know where they pull these numbers out, because I would have given them more than a 2% chance of winning the Big Ten, and that's 10 times more than 0.2%. I just don't know where they come up with these numbers.
Yeah, I don't either. And if anyone, if you paid close enough attention to that game last night, or yesterday afternoon, between Alabama and Georgia, I mean, Georgia got, I don't know if you want to say exposed. They didn't play up to their standards that they'd set for themselves throughout the year. giving up 41 points. I don't think they'd given up more than, what was the high, 17, the amount
Yeah.
of points they'd given up all year. And obviously we know that Alabama's a different animal on offense than the teams that they had played, but the way Georgia has finished this season in that game, and um, the way Michigan has finished the season over the last two games, and really a very, very dominant performance against Iowa, particularly in the second half there. Again, in that 42-3 win. I mean, who knows? I mean, I think it'll definitely be a very, very much a defensive struggle, you would assume, with both of those teams. And you look at the question that I had, and I don't know that we talked about this much, but just watching Georgia play this year, was, is Stetson Bennett good enough to win a national championship for him? And I don't put all of that on him yesterday, but I mean, coming into the game, you probably would have thought if Georgia puts up 24 points, they're probably going to win the game, right? 24-21, 24-17, somewhere in that neighborhood, based on the way they had played defense through the year. But that's got to be. I'm very interested to see what Georgia's mindset is because that has got to be an incredibly demoralizing loss for them. This is the year. This was the year that they were better than Alabama. Other years you may not necessarily say that, but this is certainly the year coming into this game that they were better, and they lost the game in pretty dominating fashion. So how they go from here is going to be very, very interesting in that game against Michigan.
It's an Alabama offense that scored 10 points in regulation against Auburn last week, scored 20 points against LSU in a recent game in the last 3 weeks, and then they explode against the team that's giving up 6 points per game. And I ran a video where I took the 4 common opponents of Alabama and Georgia and matched them up statistically. And to look at Georgia's performance against Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, and Arkansas versus Alabama's, and we're talking about 4. I think at some point that comparison doesn't make sense or isn't valid if they both played UAB. Okay. But we're talking about 4 not great opponents, but anywhere from Arkansas being a top 15 or 20 team in the country to all of them being a top 40 teams in the country. And in every instance, Georgia was much more dominant against all of those opponents. Alabama scuffled by 3 of them for sure. Tennessee to a certain extent. They didn't get control of the game until the fourth quarter. And so that statistical comparison wasn't close. Now, I expected Alabama to step up and make it a game and be close and be competitive. But I did, by full disclosure, pick Georgia to win. That result did not surprise me, but I did pick Georgia to win the game. And the other demoralizing aspect of this has to also be that they just didn't trip up. Well, they created an entry for Alabama to be in the playoff, and they're most likely going to have to get through them to win the national championship.
Yeah, no, that's you're exactly right. And I think with Alabama's matchup, a lot of the fans, and we've got something that frankly I didn't know that we would actually get. I didn't, and everything fell right for them, right? But I didn't know if we would actually ever get in this current format a group of 5 team into the playoffs. And kudos to them. Uh, they've been kind of up and down in terms of late in the year in terms of how impressive they were. But they turned it on in the second half against Houston and played well. I mean, there's not a single person in the planet that gives them a chance against Alabama except for the people in that locker room, right? So
Yeah.
the one thing that I think it's interesting is we saw how ineffective um, Alabama was against Auburn without Jamison Williams. Now, how ineffective are they going to be without Mechie? Now that I think he tore his ACL. I think he's done
Yeah.
obviously for the rest of the playoffs. So I don't know, how that impacts them. Maybe not necessarily against Cincinnati, but against either Michigan or Georgia. What does that look like when the defense is? I mean, not that Cincinnati's a bad defense; they're a really good defense, but going up against the athletes of Alabama is certainly a different animal. So how do they stack up and from that matchup once they if they're able to get by Cincinnati for the national championship game? And what's that? I think that's like a third. What's the line on the Cincinnati? Is it like 13 and a half?
Yeah. I saw
Oh,
12 or 13. And Georgia an 8-point favorite against Michigan. The two things that I think fell into Cincinnati's lap, and to credit them, they took advantage. They won all 13 games. Is that had there been another Power 5 champion with one loss, then that most likely would have knocked them out. We didn't get to see the committee have to deliberate between a one-loss Oklahoma State Big 12 champion and Cincinnati. Who knows what would have happened there, because I think coming into this weekend, Oklahoma State was 5, Cincinnati 4, correct?
mm-hmm.
So would the committee have said Cincinnati just beat a decent Houston team by 15 points, but Oklahoma State beat a much better Baylor team to win a major conference championship? And so that would have been the decision that they would have been faced with. But whether it was Cincinnati last year or UCF the 2 years that they were a candidate in 2017 and 18, there was not that direct comparison between them and a 2-loss team. It was always a 1-loss, and they weren't even given consideration. So it seemed to be the combination of two things, that Cincinnati's direct competition was 2-loss conference champions, and then, as it turned out, coincidence served them well and served the tie-breaking process well, in that it just so happened this was the season they played Notre Dame. That was the game we needed to see, and they won it. Otherwise, if Notre Dame's 11-1 and they lost to Wisconsin by a touchdown, and Cincinnati's an undefeated conference, American Conference champion that scuffled by a bunch of teams like they have, I got to think Notre Dame would have been the selection.
No, I agree with you, and especially the way that Big 12 championship game unfolded. And I'm an Oklahoma guy, and I felt for Oklahoma State in that game to be so close in the final, but also you had so many opportunities down there at the goal line in the fourth quarter. You had the previous possession; they had 3 plays from the 2, and weren't able to make it in, and then you lose by like not even inches. Like it was less than inches, right? So. I mean, it's a hard way to lose. So I think that would have, to your point, Mark, that would have been a very, very interesting conversation if they gain another inch and everything happens the rest of the way that it does. A 1-loss Oklahoma State team, Big 12 champion versus a undefeated Cincinnati would have been an interesting debate. We'd had the committee had to work for it a little bit today, as opposed to just kind of being handed the 4 teams and here you go.
It would be fascinating, as I mentioned last weekend, to be in that committee room listening to the debates, and not that they would have just started or been focused on this one particular weekend, because we would have heard them throughout the process. But you got to think, with 13 people and some of them being very holding firm to record and then metrics, but others just basically saying, this team over here is just better. It's a lot of that you wonder if, out of those 13 people, again, they leave the room and they deliver what is usually a reasonable selection that makes sense, that maybe not everybody loves, but in this case was cut and dry and was the only decision to make. But whether there is still deliberation in that room, you wonder if somebody just has kind of a parting shot to say, yeah, really, it should be Ohio State, or they're just better. So, but
Right. Well, and it's such because me and my dad were actually talking through this, through the games, and he said, what's the criteria? I mean, because I don't know that we necessarily know what's the criteria. Is it the best four on paper or the best four on the field? So he brought this analogy, which I think is solid. If Cincinnati played Ohio State, if they played Utah, I mean, for that matter, if they even played Notre Dame on the neutral field, who do rhetorically, who do you think would win that game? Versus at some point, I mean, the games actually have to matter. And there's a good point that he brought up, that I've never, not that I haven't ever thought about, but I don't know how to reconcile this. When you look at teams from a Power Five perspective, like like I mean, Notre Dame to a certain extent, but specifically like in Ohio State, when they have to play so many of these Power Five teams week in and week out, and Cincinnati played what, two? Notre Dame and Indiana were the two Power Five teams that they that they played, and I said my solution to this is why you need a playoff. This is I mean expanded playoff. This is why you need expansion, because there's only four spots, and you don't if you're expanded a little bit, you don't necessarily have to you don't have to answer that question, right? I mean, I think it would be solved on the field. So the way I respond to is, I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely, I would, without a doubt, I would pick Ohio State. Without a doubt, I would probably pick Utah the way they're playing. I probably would pick Notre Dame to beat Cincinnati the way that they are playing now versus the way they played in that game. But yeah, at the same time, the results on the field have to matter to a certain extent.
the only thing I've been able to find, yeah, those other links are old, are not connected. But the only thing that I could find for a projected Cincinnati Ohio State betting line was one article was written. It did not give a specific line, but just said that a number of Vegas insiders said that it would be a double-digit line. So yeah, if Bama's a 13-point favorite, maybe Ohio State's roughly the same thing, or at least 10.
At least 10, yeah. Yep. And there's a good, I mean, I have this, I mean, we're switching here and we can go all over the place here. It's fine with me. But the question here on the board or on the screen here is very, very interesting, going back to Oklahoma. And, everything, typically, no, you would think if Venables is involved in the bowl game. I mean, typically, no. But when you look at Oklahoma's staff right now, Grinch is gone. Roy Manning has tendered his release today. And then you've got, you've got a lot of people on the defensive side of the ball that would be gone. I wouldn't be surprised to see his involvement in some capacity. I don't know how much, because I mean he'll be doing trying to get his staff together and recruiting and stuff like that. But that's an odd situation when you've got three or four position coaches on the defensive side of the ball have already kind of moved on, and won't be part of it, because when you look, Grinch coached the safeties as as well as being the defensive coordinator. You've got Roy Manning, who coached the cornerbacks. You've got, so Brian Odom is probably about the only guy I would probably assume, if he's still either still on the staff or hasn't moved on to USC by this time, that he's probably your defensive coordinator in the bowl game. But yeah, I mean, this is, like I said, it was kind of an interesting question, because immediately I would say no. Typically, the head coach coming in would kind of just be on the sidelines watching and stuff like that, and just kind of taking everything in. But in this case, I don't know. It's a bizarre scenario.
It is. I can see a coach that would say, I'm going to focus on my staff. I'm going to focus on recruiting, and I'll see everybody in winter workouts after the season's over, and I'll start to evaluate people from them. And obviously they're going to look at game tapes, I would think. I've heard some coaches kind of dismiss that, but I got to think, why would you not watch all of the 22 films, meaning terminology there is the 22 players you see in the field, the coaching films from the previous season. I would watch them if I was a coach. I would want to see how my new players performed last year. But yeah, and I would also think that based on the coach, some would again carry on their duties toward the future with the recruiting and with the coaching staff acquirement, but others would maybe want to hang out at practice and see who stands out to them and just watch. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I would anticipate him just being on the sidelines watching, and things like that, and not necessarily being involved. But he may listen in on some of the meetings and stuff like that, especially if a guy like Brian Odom is retained, which I think that's part of the intrigue with this, and I think it's part of the intrigue with any new coach. How many of his how many staff members that he had at the previous job are going to come with him and follow him. It's a little different if you're a defensive coordinator, but as opposed to being a head coach at a previous job. But if you're and how many of them are going to stay? I mean, Oklahoma has quite a few. I think that very well could still be on this staff. DeMarco Murray's a guy that I would anticipate staying. Cale Gundy is a guy that I would anticipate staying. Joe John Finley, tight ends coach. If nothing else, his relationship with Jeff Lebby, if Lebby comes over, I would anticipate staying. So I think you have the biggest interest for me in this coaching, in what this coaching staff looks like, is I think you have a fair amount of a mixture. I think you have a fair amount of mixture of existing guys that have been on staff. I think you have a fair amount of mixture of maybe a couple of guys that Venables is familiar with, whether it be existing coaches at Clemson or guys that he's coached with in the past. And I think you also have a mix of guys that have SEC experience from a coaching perspective or a recruiting perspective, either or. So to usher Oklahoma into that new SEC, which I guess potentially could be next year. I think it's probably 23, but still could potentially be next year. So I think that's going to be something to watch for, and just the dynamic of the staff that when it gets put together.
All right, Jason, I need to head on out. Certainly feel free to stick around and answer whatever questions, but I should get going.
All right. Thanks for joining us today, Mark. I appreciate it.
I absolutely appreciate everybody being here. And remember, Wednesdays with Jason and myself, Oklahoma Sooners live at 11:30 a.m. Central. But we'll see everybody soon.
Thanks, Mark. All right. So I'll go through some other questions if you guys have any. If not, then we can conclude it for today. I certainly, from on the Oklahoma side, I certainly expect that Oklahoma will have some sort of a press conference likely tomorrow at some point. That's what I've kind of heard all along. That Oklahoma would have a press conference on Monday. I had heard Sunday evening possibly, but it looks like Monday. There's some stuff on Twitter, some TMZ people. It looked like where they saw um, some Oklahoma guys there at Brent Venables' house, kind of, with him, and certainly expect him to be on his way to Norman here sometime this evening. And then I would expect Oklahoma to have a press conference at some point tomorrow. The reason why tomorrow is Bob Stoops is actually being inducted into College Football Hall of Fame, and he'll be in Vegas along with Castiglione on Tuesday. I believe at very least Tuesday and Wednesday. So I think since nothing like official has been announced yet, I would expect that Oklahoma would likely be going in a direction of having that announced tomorrow. So look for that to come out tomorrow. Let's see, Ryan. Let's see. Yeah, they fired the wrong guy back then. And I've seen, so just to clear the air, I think there's been a lot of conversation about no, Venables was never fired back then. So he, on his own, decided to go elsewhere. Bob made the decision to bring Mike back. Wanted that to be a co-defensive coordinator type of situation. Really did everything he could to beg and plead with Venables to get him to come back, not come back, but get him to stay. At the end of the day, elected to go to Clemson. I'm sorry, end of the day, elected to go to Clemson, and I think it was the right decision for him at the time. So, but I don't think there's any hard feelings. Obviously, at this point, there's no hard feelings between him and the University of Oklahoma. So I think he's in good situation. So I'll reserve a little bit of judgment just in terms of who Oklahoma is able to get from a coordinator perspective. However, if Oklahoma is able to get Lebby as an offensive coordinator, I think at the very least, it's a wash between Riley and Lebby from an offensive coordinator perspective, play caller, quarterback coach, all of that kind of encompassed in one. And then depending on the defensive coordinator and the position coach. But I think Oklahoma is at least just as good as they were previously, and I think the newfound toughness and I think the newfound passion and energy that Venables will bring to this program is at the end of the day going to be bigger and better than what it was, enabling Oklahoma to usher themselves into the new to the SEC. Absolutely. So take some more of your thoughts. Yeah, I just saw that come across that Hazelwood's headed to Arkansas. Yeah, I think, he was a really, really good downfield blocker. I don't think he's quite as dynamic as a receiver as he's been in the past. But yeah, I think that's a tough loss. Specifically, when you think about from a bowl game perspective, Hazelwood will be gone. Theo Weiss will be gone since his name is in the portal as well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what Oklahoma throws out there from a receiver perspective. Definitely. So yeah, agree with you, T1. Venables was not fired without a doubt. Let's see. BV was my choice all along. He was the guy that I was the most excited for, and I think he's the guy that I'm the most thrilled about that got the job. Absolutely. Ron, I think Venables has too much integrity to bring recruits and players with Clemson with him. So I think the one thing, Ron, I think that's a good point. I don't know that it's necessarily bringing them with him. I don't know that he would negatively. I don't think that he would negatively recruit against Clemson. To your point, however, if there's any kids at Clemson currently or any recruits that have committed on the 2022 class that are have very strong relationships with him, I think that they'll absolutely could follow him to Oklahoma. Like I said, I mean that's going to happen everywhere. Ron, you're going to have some players like's happened at Oklahoma. You've got some players that have entered the portal. Some of them will likely go to USC. There's some 2022, 2023 kids that have decided to to follow Riley to USC. The same thing will happen here. The same thing will happen everywhere. Oklahoma will get some that they would like. Selfishly, I would love to see Brian Breesy come over from Clemson to Oklahoma. I don't know how many of you guys know about him. Really, really good defensive lineman up front. Nose tackle position for Clemson has been a really solid contributor for them. Great player. He's a guy that has the ability to shut down the middle and knows Venables offense or knows Venables defense. So especially looking at that. I think looking at that from that perspective, knowing that we're probably losing Winfrey after this year, I mean, definitely losing Winfrey after this year, we have a spot there, possibly. Hey, Tony, thanks for the comment. That was never, Heupel was never going to happen. There's too much bad blood between the two right now. Let's see. Oklahoma's not a team that goes through regression. No, I don't think they. I think a lot of it will what Oklahoma looks like next year. I think a lot will depend on, the transfer portal, how the 2022 class looks, and then, whoever leaves early. I think mission number one will be the recruitment of Caleb Kelly. So if it's Lebby or if it's Brady or whoever it might be, that's the coordinator is going to be big just in terms of being able to secure him. I've heard through the grapevine that he's going to remain with Oklahoma at the very least through the bowl game, and then see where it goes from here. So I think a dynamic offensive coordinator is going to be a guy that first and foremost is securing his commitment for the future. Let's see. Yeah, no, I don't think any regression. Agree. No, the Heupel Brent is much better than Heupel. I haven't heard anything definitively, Jesse, but I think that's the top guy that Oklahoma's targeting for an offensive coordinator. So haven't heard one way or the other. But Lori, it isn't a rumor at this point. It's not been confirmed by the University of Oklahoma, but there has been numerous very, very reputable media outlets that have reported this along with myself. So it's not a rumor, but has not been confirmed by Oklahoma. But you see, Oklahoma has flew to South Carolina today to secure Brent, and then there's some there's some other things that have been happening behind the scenes. So it's about as close to a done deal as it can be. Are you happy with hire leading to the SEC? I mean, I think you're always nervous about a hire. This was the best situation for me of the realistic candidates that Oklahoma had. I was never excited about Matt Rule. Was definitely not excited about Dan Lanning. That would be a little bit of more of a kind of disappointing, depressing hire for Oklahoma if that's who it would have been. So I mean, there's always nervousness, but I think this was my number one choice. Absolutely was my number one choice. Yeah, I don't think he's going to implode. He has he's been endorsed by so many people. He's never been a head coach, but neither was Bob Stoops or Lincoln Riley, for that matter. Yeah, it's definitely possible to get Lebby. I think absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, so I haven't seen what's been announced, but I haven't seen what's been announced. I've been on here for the last hour or so, but it would be nice to. I think Lebby for me is the number one offensive guy out there. So if they can get him, secure him, I think that's huge. That's definitely huge, without a doubt. So let me scroll here and see what some of the questions that you have now. Yeah, we're going to hire. I feel very confident that Oklahoma's going to hire a defensive coordinator. Not necessarily sold on the head coach being a play caller. Yes, he can be involved in the game plan. Yes, he can have some influence over, what the play call looks like, and listen in and could even take over from time to time if he needed to. But I'm not a big advocate of him being the defensive coordinator from a play calling perspective. I am an advocate of him being a linebackers coach. I think if he decided that he wanted to do that, if he then, but I think how do you look at that? I think you lose Odom if you bring him if he decides to coach the linebacker. So I think that's going to be something that's very interesting. So Todd Bates and Brandon Hall are the two big names that I've heard some stuff about Jim Leonard. For those that don't know Brandon Hall, he is the defensive coordinator at Troy. He was with Oklahoma previously when Venables was the defensive coordinator here, so there was a lot of familiarity within the two. He's actually the interim head coach for Troy right now until there is somebody named. So I think he would be a good choice. I think he would be a good choice because of his affinity on the special team side that Oklahoma has really been lacking. I think they were a little bit better when Shane Beamer was here, but then this year obviously they weren't anywhere near as good as they've been in the past. So I think a dynamic special teams. And when I say not as good, from a punt coverage perspective and from a return game perspective, they haven't been anywhere near as good. We've got two of the best specialists, in the game with Burkich from a field goal kicking perspective. I think he's been solid. And then Turk, one of the best punters in the country. But I think the missing link there is that. And then Todd Bates has a lot of familiarity with Venables. He has been the defensive line coach at Clemson over the last 6 or 8 years. And so I think that would be a good hire, a very, very dynamic recruiter, one of the best recruiters in the country. So there's good and bad parts on either one. I think Hall is a guy that you could probably get fairly easy, would jump at the chance to be the DC at Oklahoma, and then Bates maybe a little bit of a tougher sell because I think there's a chance that he could get that coordinator job at Clemson. So it depends on what he wants to do. Does he want to be the coordinator there at Clemson and follow Venables, or does he want to be with Venables and be part of that system in Oklahoma? So Jim Leonard is a guy that I've heard. I think that's really kind of more on the outside looking in type of situation, but will be a great hire without a doubt. Joe Brady is a guy that has a potential to be the offensive coordinator. The one thing that I have against Brady is everything that I've heard is he doesn't love the grind of the year-long recruiting, and I think recruiting is such a big part of such a part of this program and such a part of college football and athletics just in general is you got to have a guy that's really good and really excited about that. Other than that, I think he would be a good choice as well, but that's the concern that I have. Strength and conditioning coach is going to be outside of the offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. To me, I think it's the biggest hire. It would be an absolute home run hire if Oklahoma was able to get Tommy Moffatt from the previous strength and conditioning coach from LSU. I think I think he knows what kind of athlete Oklahoma needs to have going into the SEC. So I think you build your athletes. Obviously, even if Oklahoma's in the Big 12 for 2 more years, I think you build your athletes according to what they need to be at the at the next level at the SEC where Oklahoma is at. So let's see. Let's go. Yes, no one individual is bigger than the program, without a doubt. I see some comments about Dan Mullen. Absolutely not. Now this would be funny. We talked about this, Tijuana, a little bit in a group chat that I'm in about this, and I don't know that Oklahoma would have enough money to bring in a guy, bring in a guy like Lebby and also bring in a guy like Dan Lanning over to Oklahoma from Georgia. I think he's in the neighborhood of 1.7 million at Georgia right now, and unless Oklahoma is making a much different change than I'm accustomed to or are ready to talk through, I don't know that Oklahoma has. Maybe if Oklahoma was already in the SEC, had that money there, but I would be surprised if they're able to pull a guy like Lanning over to Oklahoma. Let's see. Yeah, again, he would definitely bring some. I think he would bring some guys over without a doubt. Brian Breesy, yeah, I think that would be outstanding. I would be extremely excited about that. So there's been some thoughts about could again the expensiveness of this would be hard, but if you had a guy like Joe Brady could be the passing game coordinator, and then Lebby could be the offensive coordinator, and then work in tandem with one another, that would be that would be interesting. I think that would be very, very expensive for Oklahoma. OC will be Lebby. Our DC should Dragon one is good in the secondary. Yeah, the secondary coach is going to be something that's interesting. Ryan, we're getting ready to have an article that's going to publish for Last Word on College Football that talks about some potential guys that might move into a position at Oklahoma. I think a secondary coach, a defensive backs coach is very very interesting because Oklahoma has lost Grinch, Oklahoma has lost Manning, the two guys that coached the secondary, and a lot of people would say, and I'm one of them, that's not a big loss on either side of the ball, on either one of those, based on how well or how lack thereof Oklahoma has played in the secondary. So I think that's that's going to be interesting. There's a couple of guys. Personally, I would love the idea of Corey Raymond. Corey Raymond is the defensive backs coach at LSU. Not sure if he's going to be retained or has been retained by Brian Kelly. He's kind of the originator of this DBU movement at LSU. I would think that he would be great. To bring over. Dante Williams is another guy that is the interim coach at USC, has a lot of inroads on the West Coast to get that Cali connection back. So those are a couple of the guys that that I could see. Defensive back coach at Clemson is a guy that could that could move over as well. So those are three names that I've heard on the defensive back side that could possibly be there. Let's see if any questions we have here. A lot of negative comments about Riley, which is kind of funny. And if anybody's on Twitter and have seen this TBOW reference, just kind of look it up and ask around. It's kind of funny. No, I don't necessarily, Tony. I don't think he's tired of Kiffin. I think this is just an opportunity, that he would jump at based on his relationship, his previous time in Oklahoma. It's his alma mater, really close to Joe John Finley. So I think a lot of it really kind of makes sense. Definitely agree. Definitely agree, JD. I don't think Caleb would go to USC, honestly. Jackson Dart is already there, and I think that's who you're mentioning, Gatorade All-American. I think if he's here, he's the unquestioned. I think he's the unquestioned guy that will be the guy for Oklahoma next year. No doubt about it. I think if he, for whatever reason, if he leaves, look out for Dylan Gabriel, a guy in the portal, UCF guy. He would be a guy that would be perfect in Lebby's system. He's a rental for a year. I mean, that's the only thing that you hate about that. But I mean, I think he's a guy that Oklahoma would look long and hard at if Oklahoma's not able to secure Caleb Williams. But I think at the time of the announcement, I was heavily leaning towards him probably going. Now I'm more on the side. I think he'll probably stay without a doubt. Well, not without a doubt, but I think he is. I think he's a guy that's trending towards staying, but I don't know if he'll officially stay. Hey Cam, thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate you. I understand. We're praying for you, or anything you need. I'm here for you. Reach out to me. Yep, I think there was some nervousness from Lincoln Riley's perspective. Then that you're right on the beat here. I think he would have. I think he probably was a little bit nervous about Oklahoma going to the SEC. Jesse, you're preaching to the choir, brother. This is the thing that I have talked about over and over and over this week is Oklahoma progressively got worse with Riley. As you mentioned, the loss against Georgia should have absolutely won that game. Could have made a comment that could have made an argument that Oklahoma should have won the national championship that year if they have some sort of semblance of a defense. Was less competitive against Bama, was non-competitive against LSU, and then to your point, didn't make the playoffs last year and didn't even win the Big 12 this year. So, yeah, I think the negative progression was a big part. Is it possible? Yeah, Brady is absolutely in play without a doubt. I think Brady is in play. I think he's probably the second choice. I think Lebby is the guy that they're going to offer first. And if he says no or doesn't have the interest, then certainly, I think Joe Brady is second. Cliff, I think he'll go get a DC. He'll be very involved in the game plan and be very involved, but I don't think that he will run the defense. No one can argue that Oklahoma didn't regress under Riley unless they have. Yeah, you're exactly right, Ryan. Good question here about Kennedy Brooks. I would expect him not to be back, but at the same time, from everything I've heard, that he didn't participate in any of the kind of senior type situation stuff with Oklahoma. So he could potentially come back. Would love to see him come back, but I would guess that he's probably gone. Especially Oklahoma wasn't able to run the ball very well, but still he got over 1,000 yards this year. So he had a really good season for Oklahoma. Hope this is a joke. Joe Brady would be my pick as offensive coordinator. I like Lebby a little bit more. I think from the recruiting perspective, I think that puts him over the top. But Brady would be a close second without a doubt. Tommy Moffatt is the guy that I would just love. I would love that almost as much as the Venables hire. I think that would just be an outstanding opportunity for Oklahoma. Without him, I think maybe they make a call to Schmitty. Other than that, I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of a good feel about who might be another guy that they would look at. This has been floated around as a potential opportunity, without a doubt. Yep, I think Major will be back. He'll definitely be part of that running back room with Eric Gray, Major, Gavin Sawchuk, coming in as a true freshman as well. Will be a part of that conversation as well. Let's see. Yeah, I think one of the big things is, I touched on that a little bit ago, that Oklahoma would need to hire specifically some guys that are really good recruiters, especially in the SEC area. I think a guy, I think a guy like Todd Bates would be a good dynamic recruiter. I think if Raymond is able to come over as a defensive back coach, as a dynamic recruiter as well. So I think that's going to be something that is understood by Venables, and Venables is about as good as a recruiter as it gets as well. So Yep. Not necessarily saying that he can't, Tony, but I think he's just talked about not being a guy that he really that was interested in the grind of the recruiting game. Let's see. No, there's a lot of comments about Mullen. No. When assignments are they want? Okay. Pete Golding is interesting. He's probably going to be in line for a head coaching job at some point here pretty soon. Beanbo is on the road recruiting for Oklahoma, so he's not with Riley yet. So I think he's a guy that I would hope that Oklahoma is able to retain. He's one of the position coaches Oklahoma probably would retain, possibly. Who do you think is better, Venables or Riley? I mean, I think it remains to be seen from a head coaching perspective. Obviously, we'll see how the next few years go before we can kind of answer that question. Got a question for you, Texas and the SEC. So part of that flower is Texas is going to have to give up their Longhorn network for entrance into the SEC. Gary Patterson, yeah. That could be a possibility. I think there's a chance that he may go to Texas in some capacity that I've heard. That's interesting, Tony. Derek Mason is a guy that I haven't heard much of, but I think that wouldn't be a bad hire either. Right? He did a great job with Auburn's defense this year. We do not have a special teams coach on staff, so that's why I like the Brandon Hall opportunity to come to Oklahoma, just to have that special teams knowledge and what he's been able to do. Riley didn't have a special teams coach, but I think Shane Beamer facilitated that role. Which recruits do you think? And I don't really, I haven't really followed obviously the Ole Miss or Clemson recruiting, so I don't know. I'll have to do some diligence on that, Jesse, just to see if there's any guys that may potentially be considering flipping. If when and if Venables when Venables is announced, and then if Lebby comes with them. I agree. I think Caleb's if Lebby's here, and I think Joe Brady, he probably stays as well. Talked about Beanbo a little bit earlier. He's a guy that's kind of up in the air, but a guy that I would like to see him. I would like to see him stay. Absolutely, without a doubt. I think he would be seen as a reason to stay. So I don't necessarily think that we would hire a QB coach, Jesse. I think Lebby and or Brady would be that quarterback coach. He was the quarterback coach at Ole Miss. He's been the old quarterback coach at Carolina. He's the quarterback coach at LSU as well for Brady. One thing to remember about the quarterback situation, Dylan Gabriel, was that Lebby was previously at UCF, so he potentially could have that inroads should kind of the worst case scenario happen, and he not come over. Yes, I think Caleb Williams. I think it's leaning more towards that way. Hey, Cassie, thanks for joining. Thanks for coming. I think Tommy Moffatt is the number one guy there. I'm extremely excited about that, without a doubt. If Oklahoma could land them, that would be outstanding. Let's see. Well, I appreciate all the questions and comments and everything like that. You guys have been outstanding. This week. At one point, we had almost 600 people on the line. So that is just amazing, especially for a Sunday afternoon. So we will definitely keep in mind we will go live. We will go live on Wednesday, and then I'll try to do something tomorrow when this is announced. Maybe afternoon or late evening, if we're able to when this is announced. So thank all of you guys for coming. And I've made kind of a commitment on myself, really just to be much more active on Twitter. And then you guys, I've gained a ton of followers covering this over the last week. So please, if you haven't, come follow me at Jason Ray One. We'll have a lot of Oklahoma content, not just Oklahoma. I should say not just Oklahoma football. We'll talk about recruiting. We'll get into some basketball stuff. We'll get into some softball stuff as well. Maybe even do some shows here, some live shows when softball season starts. If you guys would be excited about doing something like that on the other side of things. So keep us in mind. Come follow me. Make sure you hit the like, hit the subscribe, hit the share button, and tell all your friends about this. And until tomorrow, we'll hopefully maybe something tomorrow or even Tuesday, and then we'll absolutely be going live Wednesday, and then maybe we have a little bit more stuff solidified on the on the Oklahoma coaching staff side. So thank you all for coming. God bless, and Boomer Sooner.